Hello and welcome to Narayana Eyes. I'm Pratik, your faculty for daily news analysis. Students, in today's DNA session, we shall be focusing on four most important topics from the Hindu newspaper. Trust me, once we explain or once we cover all the topics, you'll be in a position to understand and at the same time write answers for the four topics that we shall be discussing in today's DNA session, right? So let us start today's DNA session with a motivational quote. Now, the motivational quote is dream big, work hard, stay focused, and surround yourself with good people. So, this should be your mantra of life. Dream big, work hard, stay committed, and always surround yourself with good people from whom you can learn many new things. You can inculcate good values, good ethical values, moral values, which will help you to grow in your life, right? So, on this note, let us get started. Again, those students who aspire to be an IAS officer or IPS officer, we have introduced 1 year and 2 year prelims cum mains integrated course. The focus will be holistically on prelims, mains, interview, right? Even during our classes, will help you with the means answer writing. Then we'll also discuss the questions asked during interview, right? So in the classes, we prepare you, we train you to be officers, future officers of our country, right? So you can see the QR code. Please scan the QR code, go through the details of the program and fill in your details, and our team will get back to you with all the required necessary information, right? So these are the four topics that we shall be discussing today. The first topic is taken from Hindu, page number 8. Now, this talks about India's conciliatory approach towards China, keeping in mind the recent skirmishes, border tensions between both the countries. The second article is taken from Hindu, page number 11. Now, there's a growing concern of exclusion of workers or deleting the names of workers from the MGNREGA program. So, we'll understand what is MGNREGA program, the reason why the names are being deleted. The third article is taken from Hindu, page number 12. Now, here, Indian Navy has announced, military exercise with the African nations. So here we'll discuss the maritime security, India's growing presence in the Indian Ocean region to counter the growing heft or hegemony of China in the Indian Ocean region, right? And the fourth article talks about the state governments, or for that matter the hospitals, not sharing the data of the organ transplantation, which is a concern that the center has highlighted. So these are the four articles topic that we shall be discussing in today's DNA sessions. Let us start with the first article. The title is China ties beware, conciliation without deterrence, right? Now, in this article, we are going to discuss the Indian-China relations, at the same time the evolving stance or the recent stance India has taken vis-a-vis China to improve the bilateral relations, right? Now, and you can map this for your means. That is, in means we have GS paper 2 international relations. Under IR we have the bilateral relation India has with different countries, the neighborhood relations, and China is our neighboring country. Now, why do we study this topic? Because of the questions asked on India and China, like it was asked in the year 2017. China is using its economic relations and positive trade surplus as tools to develop military power status in Asia. So, questions are often asked on our neighboring countries, and as a reason, such topics become extremely important for the UPSC CSC examination. What is the context? Recent diplomatic softening. Now, in the light of the tensions, border disputes between India and China, the skirmishes, the fights, the standoffs, be it during the Doklam standoff 2017 or the Galwan clash of 2020. In one of the recent podcasts, the Prime Minister of our country said that it is only through dialogue, it is only through dialogue, dialogue and cooperation, that the relations between India and China can be stabilized. After years of disengagement, this statement by the Prime Minister of a country highlights India's conciliatory approach. In India's conciliatory approach towards China. It seems that India wants to improve the ties relations with China. Right, so this is something a major development, and that's the reason it is important to discuss this topic. Strategic reassessment underway. Now we are not very sure whether the recent stance taken by India, is it a part of long-term policy or is it just tactical recalibration, which means just a small term, let's say, approach. Which means India, it seems, is hedging. India is hedging vis-a-vis China, which means India is adopting a cautious and flexible approach, which means India is not taking any firm stance. Why? To keep a room for diplomacy, to keep a room for something, to keep a room to take a decision based on how the situation or conditions change on ground. This is the context of the article. Now, in brief, let us try to understand the historical background of India and China relations. Now, pre-independent, post-independence and initial optimism, that is, friendly relation in 1950s. Diplomatic recognition. Now, India was the first country to recognize China's People's Republic of China. India was the first country to recognize a communist People's Republic of China in the year 1950, and this set off the diplomatic relations between India and China in the year 1954. Then in the year 1954, a historic Panchashil agreement was signed between both the nations, and this agreement, it lays foundation for peace between both the nations, which means India and China are two major nations, and it is important for both the nation to peacefully coexist. To peacefully coexist, and we all know the famous Hindi Chini Bhai by the famous slogan during the 50s. It actually reflected the mutual trust Indians and the Chinese had with each other. However, the optimism waned, it came down. Why? Because of the border disputes. Now the border disputes started surfacing, and this actually, it sort of hindered, or rather it strained the relation between both the nations. Right, now we saw the territorial disputes in the Aksai Chin region. Where is Aksai Chin? In the Jammu and Kashmir. So this is the Jammu and Kashmir map. So this is the Aksai Chin area, and in the Arunachal Pradesh. So the territorial disputes gradually began, which finally led to a full-scale war between India and China in the year 1962. Now, in this 1962 war, India had to face massive defeat from China. This also led to territorial losses, which means we lost land in the Aksai Chin region. So see, this is the map of Jammu and Kashmir. This part is with China, this part is with Pakistan. So which means India controls, right? Practically controls only 1/3 of the entire Jammu and Kashmir area. Now, post the conflict, both the tensions between both the nations, now India was inclined, or India inched towards USSR. India went closer to USSR. Now, because see, the Cold War era, please remember the Cold War era, that is the period between 1945 to 1991, which was the ideological conflict between USA versus USSR. Now, though China being a communist state, but because of the border conflict between China and the US, China, it inched towards USA, it became a part of the US camp, and India became a part of, though India was a non-communist state, India became a part of USSR. So this was the geopolitical realignment during the Cold War. And then post 62 war, there were border skirmishes, conflicts at the Nathula and Chola Pass in the year 1967 and the Sumdorong Chu standoff in the year 1987. So people often remember the massive defeat India had to face in the year 1962, but when Chinese tried to conquer more area in the year 67 and 87, we did not allow the Chinese troop to conquer any area during 67 and 87. And then finally in the year 1988, joint working group comprising officials of India and China was established. Why? To resolve the border dispute and normalize the relation between both the nations. And then 1990s onwards, now the trade and economic relations started to strengthen between India and China. Now many confidence building agreements were signed between India and China, especially in the year 1993 and 1996. In these 2 years, major agreements were signed. Why? The objective was to establish peace and tranquility along the border. And then came the major 2005 agreement, right? In this agreement, this laid down the political parameters and guiding principles to resolve the border disputes, at the same time normalize the relations between both the nations. And gradually in the 2000, that is in the 21st century, the trade and economic relationships started dominating between India and China, right? Trade and economic relationship. Now the trade and economy, or the relationship started getting strengthening, also because, or also through other organizations like the BRICS is an acronym for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is a political military organization comprising many countries including India and China. This SCO is a Chinese-led initiative. So you see that initially the relations were good, then the border disputes came, there was a war, border disputes 67 and 87, and then in the 21st century, the first decade saw the strengthening trade relation between both the nations. But then in the recent few years, especially post 2015, again India and China witnessed many fights, many standoffs. For example, the 2013 Depsang standoff, then 14 Chumar incident, Doklam, Galwan. So these were the conflicts that took place between both the nations, and finally post the Galwan clash, right? The corps commander, which means the commanders from both the nations, they started meeting. Why? For phased withdrawal of troops. Now despite the tensions between both the nations starting from 2013, the trade relation, or for that matter the trade between both the nations was not affected. Rather, on the other side, the trade volume between both the nations started to increase despite the border conflict. And this shows the economic interdependence between both the nations. And finally, in the year 2024, right, in especially post the Galwan clash, there were few friction points where the Indians and Chinese troops were still stationed. But then in the year 2024, in the mid 2024, Indian and the Chinese troops, they withdrew from the few fraction points that that was again a point of dispute or disagreement between both the nations. Now, given that the Indian and Chinese troops have withdrawn from all the friction points, this seems that the relationship between both the nations is normalizing. This is a move towards diplomatic normalization between India and China. So this is the historical background of India and the Chinese relation. Now, if I talk about the recent development in the India and China relationship, as I told you, strategic shift in tone. As I told you, the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, in one of the podcasts, said that only dialogue and cooperation with China can stabilize the relationship. Now, this statement was uttered almost after 5 to 6 years, right? Neither India nor China, they spoke of dialogue, cooperation, diplomacy in these past 4 years. But now it seems that both the nation, they want to normalize the relationship, right? Now, strategic ambiguity. As I told you, we do not know whether the recent stance or recent statement by the Prime Minister, is it a part of long-term policy or is it a tactical recalibration or part of, let's say, short-term policy. We have no idea about it. But India's hedging, which means India is adopting a cautious approach, we'll see based on the situation, how the situation evolves. We decide if we are to strengthen the relationship with China or simply maintain status quo. Return to earlier outreach. Now, especially post Mr. Modi, when he became the Prime Minister, in order to normalize the relationship, especially post the Depsang Chumar incident in the year 2013 and 2014, Mr. Modi tried to improve the relationship with China by adding a personal touch with the President of China, Xi Jinping. So there were informal summits, that is Wuhan, when the Indian Prime Minister visited China and when the Chinese President visited Mamallapuram in 1918. Even post Doklam clash, it led to Wuhan and Mamallapuram summit to normalize the relationship. But post the Galwan incident, the relationship strained. Right? Now, despite the trade and economic relationships strengthening, or the volume of trade growing, there are core issues which are yet to be solved, which are unresolved so far. And which are the core issues? One is the border disputes, right? The border disputes, the Western Front, the Eastern Front, the Central Front, Western Aksai chain. In the Eastern, we have Arunachal Pradesh, the center sector, that is some parts along India and China border, India and Sikkim border, and India and Uttarakhand border, right? These are the core issues. Then the economic asymmetry, the difference, the gap between the economy of India and economy of China. Indian economy is close to $3.5 trillion economy. Chinese economy is close to $15 trillion economy. Look at the massive gap between the economies of these two nations, and then the power competition between both the nations, right? Both India and China want to establish themselves as a major power in the Asian continent and beyond. China is pacing, India is trying to compete with China and also try to establish herself as a major power. Trade and economic relationship, as I told you, despite the border clash, despite no political engagement between both the nations, in the year 2023, the trade reached to a massive number of 125 billion, which was 1.9% growth than the previous year. But here, please remember that there's a growing trade deficit, which means India is importing more than what India is exporting, which means India owes a debt, or India owes money to China. Why? Because India simply imports a lot more than what it exports to China. So there's a growing trade deficit, right? Persistent geopolitical conflicts. Now, besides the border disputes between both the nations, besides the border clashes between both the nations, there are geopolitical conflicts as well between India and China. Now, the way China is expanding herself, especially in the Indian neighboring regions, especially in the Indian Ocean region, this actually has emerged as one of the most significant maritime threats to our nation. So, and this has actually raised alarms in the defense forces, in the armed forces, because of which the armed forces are taken or are taking required necessary steps, be it modernizing the military, modernizing the armed forces, in order to, tackle the threat coming from China in the Indian Ocean region. So there's a maritime threat that India is facing from China, and we have to build our armed forces strong so as to tackle the threat coming from China. So Indo-Pacific region, right? So India and China are competing to establish their hegemony or power in the Indo-Pacific region. Then China-Pakistan economic corridor. Now this corridor, it's a corridor that passes through India's Kashmir region, that is Pakistan occupied Kashmir. Now, India has raised voice against CPEC. Why? Because this actually violates the territorial integrity of a nation. Then there is Belt and Road Initiative. Now, CPEC is part of the Belt and Road Initiative. This Belt and Road Initiative is a major economic and, let's say, economic policy of China in order to establish connectivity. It's a geopolitical policy of the Chinese government to establish trade networks which connects the Asian continent with the European continent, African continent. So, under the Belt and Road Initiative, there is this road initiative which connects through road, that is Asia, Central Asia, West Asia to Europe, and then there is maritime route. There is road network, there is maritime network, which again connects China with the Indian Ocean countries, and then Africa again connecting the European region. Now, given that in the year 2025, India and China are celebrating 75 years of anniversary, right? There have been few initiatives taken. For example, cultural, media, academic exchanges are held this year in order to normalize the relationship. Now, you see that recently India has remarked, and this remark by India towards China, it reflects a conciliatory approach towards China. But here it is very important to balance. Yes, it is important that we try to normalize the relationship with China, and which India is sort of trying to normalize. At the same time, India is also strengthening her partnership with the Quad members. Now, the Quad members comprises countries of India, US, Japan, and Australia, all four major economies or democratic nations. So these like-minded nations have come together. So India has invested in the Quad partnership so as to strengthen partnership with these four nations, so that in case the relationship between India and China worsens, we expect these nations, especially countries like US, Japan, Australia, to come to help India. So we are balancing how by also having conciliatory approach towards China, so that the relationship does not deteriorate. At the same time, we are strengthening our relationship with these three democratic nations. At the same time, we are modernizing the military. Now, please remember that we have to modernize our military. Only when we are powerful, Chinese will never try or dare to attack us. If we remain weak, Chinese will definitely try to attack us, like it attacked in 2017, 13, 14, 15. So it is very important to grow militarily powerful so as to create deterrence, so that China does not dare to attack India. Now, the US angle. Why? Because Donald Trump has assumed presidency in America. So we see that the policies of America under President Donald Trump, they are not consistent. Which means, for example, we know that Americans and Russians, right? they are rivals, right? Historically, their relationship, or for that matter, the relationship between both the nations have always been strained. Hardly there were friendly relations between both these nations. But now Donald Trump, right, he's making hard bargains with rivals like China and Russia, which means Donald Trump is trying to normalize a relationship, which means Donald Trump is trying to focus on commerce economy. Essentially, Trump wants, or his focus is more on commerce. So he realizes that by imposing sanctions, nothing is happening, and that's the reason he's trying to sort of make his rivals happy by, let's say, by, you know, providing a satisfactory solution or approach to the concerns the American rivals have. For example, Russians have a problem with the NATO coming closer to the Russian borders. So, sort of Trump is trying to give assurance to Russians that we are not going to come, or NATO is not going to come close to Russia. So, please be rest assured. Let's focus on commerce. Let's, sign trade deals. Let's sign economy deals, and let's focus on commerce. Again, in the last few years, the relation between USA and Chinese have not been good. They are strained. So we never know. Indians, or we thought that as the relation with America and Chinese are not good, and we have very good relationship with the US, so maybe in future, if India and China have a war, the Americans would come to our support. But there is no guarantee. There's no guarantee that Americans would help us. Why? Because now we see that Donald Trump is trying to make peace with his enemies, or rivals rather. Now again, Chinese American support during China crisis. That's what I said, that we have given that the Americans have withdrawn support from Ukraine. We cannot rely on the Western nations. We cannot rely on Western nations or America, so that whenever there's a war between India and China, we cannot be over dependent on the Western nations. What if the Western nations do not help us? That's the reason we have adopted a more conciliatory approach towards China. Reliance on US intelligence, which means even to this date, many allies of America, they depend on the intelligence provided by the United States, right? So it is based on the intelligence US provides. It helps our, national security concerns. So again, India has two major rivals, Pakistan and China. In order to keep our border safe, we need intel, and intel, right? So America, given that we have good relation, America provides intel or intelligence to our country, through which we can actually secure our borders, right? But again, we never know that in future, if the relationship worsens or let's say deteriorates between India and China, then maybe we might not get intelligence from America. Quad dynamics, right? So again, we discussed that India is trying to balance. How? By strengthening relationship with the Quad members. At the same time, India is trying to work, right? Work so that India normalizes the relationship with China, and the relationship does not worsen so much so that there is a possibility of war between India and China, right? So what is the way forward? Strategic vigilance, that is avoiding complacency, right? Which means, though having dialogue with China is very, very important, but at the same time, we have to build our capacity to create deterrence, right? Only when we build power capacity, Chinese will not dare to attack us. Strategic vigilance, avoiding complacency, peace backed by power. So if we want peace, we have to build our capacity. We have to be a powerful nation. It should not lead to weakening military preparedness. By focusing on peace, you should not deviate from strengthening your military. You had to make yourself a powerful nation. That is prerequisite to secure your national interest. This is something very, very important. Why? Because a dialogue alone Dialogue alone cannot, you know, dialogue alone cannot deter aggression. Just by having talks, diplomatic talks, it cannot prevent a war. So you have to be a powerful nation, right? Then we have to adopt a clear policy framework. When it comes to China, we need to have a clear and coherent Chinese policy that aligns with economic objectives and national security imperatives. So whenever, so again, trading with China, yes, it helps our country, it helps our business, it helps our consumers. We get investments from China, then the Chinese products are relatively cheaper than the other branded products. So it helps our consumers. At the same time, we have to focus on our national security. So here we have to balance, uh, balance what? One, we have to, yes, have a conciliatory approach towards China. At the same time, we have to be wary of our national security concerns. Strengthening military capabilities and infrastructure. Modernization drive. Now, it seems that India is reducing the budget on defense. We cannot do this. We have to be a powerful nation. We have to make ourselves strong. And how do we make ourselves strong? By manufacturing or importing submarines, fighter jets and missile systems. So we have to make ourselves a powerful country so as to create deterrence so that China does not dare or thinks of attacking our country. Then cooperation, we have discussed about Quad, right? Border infrastructure, so we have to build roads, tunnels, bridges, so that whenever there's a war, we can quickly mobilize and deploy our forces along the bordering region. During a war, given the tough terrain along the India and China border, it is very important to focus on infrastructure for the quick mobility, quick deployment of Indian forces in case a war breaks out between India and China. Then institutionalized dialogue and confidence building. Yes, again, right, we have to, continuously engage with the Chinese continuously, which means there have to be political relation, diplomatic relationship, then trade relationship, then again the military commanders have to talk with each other so as to, prevent any conflict or to reduce the misunderstanding between both the nations, right? So economic strategy, again, balanced trade relationship, which means we have to reduce our dependence on China, which means we have to reduce our trade deficit with China. How? We have to reduce our reliance on China. How? By, let's say, diversifying our sources from, or diversifying our sources, the goods that we import, we have to diversify the sources. We cannot be over dependent on China. Then here the author of the article is trying to suggest that India and China can collaborate on sectors like renewable energy, digital technology, healthcare, and infrastructure. So these are the areas where both India and China can cooperate. Now these are the areas where India can also, let's say, contribute so as to reduce the trade deficit, right? For example, electronics. Now electronics, when it comes to electronics, India is a heavy importer of the electronics, let's say raw materials as well as the finished goods. So we have to invest, collaborate in those sectors where both the nations benefit. Then this point we already discussed, soft diplomacy, we have to focus on tourism, we have to focus on student exchanges, university exchanges. So there has to be soft diplomacy to normalize the relationship. And then given the conflict between India and China, we also need to find areas where both the nations can collaborate, work together. For example, climate change, counter terrorism, and pandemic response. So these are the areas where both the nations can, cooperate, collaborate. Indo-Pacific dynamics. Now, just by focusing on dialogue, negotiation, peace, we cannot be ignorant of the intentions of China. Chinese have this very bad record of betraying India. So we have to, work both ways. One, we have to try to normalize the relationship. And on the other hand, we also need to be very, very cautious, right? Now, again, we have to focus on maritime cooperation. Why? For regional stability. Cooperating in the maritime cooperation is very important for regional stability. Then there can also be technological cooperation, for example, in artificial intelligence, in clean energy, as well as innovation. Both the nations can cooperate. So this is how we can proceed in order to improve the relationship. But please remember that India has to balance two things. One, yes, we have to work towards normalizing the relation, and on the other hand, we also have to build power, build our capability, so as to make ourselves strong to create deterrence, so that China does not think or days of attacking India. So, for example, India can easily attack Pakistan. Why? Because Pakistan is a weak nation. But we fear that if we attack Pakistan, Chinese may help Pakistan, right? So, if your enemy is weak, it is very easy to attack. So, compared to India and China, compared to China, yes, we are a weak nation, be it economy wise, be it military wise. That's the reason we have to build power. We have to make ourselves economically and militarily strong, so as to create a level playing field. I hope you understood the first topic. Second topic. Center issues guidelines to tackle high rate of job card deletions under MGNREGA. So you'll understand about the MGNREGA program. This you can map under GS paper 2 under the policies launched by the government of India and the issues with the policies. So again, a question on the different schemes are asked, different programs. Like a question was asked in the year 2015 on recognition of prior learning scheme, right? So questions on schemes and policies are. Now, what is the context? The context is that there's a growing concern. Why? Because the government of India has deleted the names of, let's say, names of workers who got themselves registered under the MGNREGA scheme. Who got registered under the MGNREGA scheme. What does it mean? Which means now whenever anyone who is seeking to work, they get a job card under the MGNREGA scheme. So this is a scheme under which job cards are issued to people who are willing to work. Now here it seems that government is actually deleting the names of people, right? How? By deleting, or let's say by deleting the names of people who are enrolled in this particular program. First and foremost, let us try to understand what is MGNREGA. MGNREGA stands for Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, guarantee assurance. Right? Now, this was a program launched in the year 2005 under the MGNREGA Act, under the NREGA Act of 2005. This program, this scheme, right, this scheme, it provides legal right to work for rural citizens of India. Legally, the rural citizens of a country can ask for work. It's a legal right of the people who are residing in the rural area. It's a right, which means whenever they are asking for this right to work, the government has to compulsorily give this work to the rural citizens, and the objective is to provide, out of 365 days, to provide 100 days of unskilled manual work to the rural households of our country. Why? What is the purpose? To enhance the livelihood, to enhance the livelihood security, to enhance the livelihood security. So 100 days of work is given to people who enroll themselves under the scheme. It is only applicable for the rural citizens and not the urban citizens. This is what you need to keep in mind, right? So these points are again very important for your prelims examination, right? So again, compared to the urban cities, it is very difficult to find a job in the rural areas. That's the reason the government has introduced this scheme to enhance rural employment. What is the eligibility? Again, this is self-explanatory. You need to be citizen, at least 18 years, belong to rural household and be willing to do unskilled, not skilled. So you get 100 days of work in a year at minimum wages set by the government. And if the work is not provided from the date of application, you fail to get a work. If the work is not given to you in 15 days, then the worker is entitled to compensation allowance. Then there are social audits as well to ensure that the money given by the government is properly utilized for this scheme. Social audits are held so as to bring transparency to this scheme, so as to close all the gaps in the scheme, right? So these are some of the key provisions. Again, this is self-explanatory. Decentralized planning, which means it is not the government of India who plans, it is the Panchayati Raj institution, especially when it comes to villages. It is the Gram Sabha who plans, who monitors. See, it is the Gram Sabha who plans, monitors and implements the projects. And it is a Gram Sabha who is responsible for proposing at least 50% of the work. Now, to provide work, you need to have work in the rural areas. So, it is a Gram Sabha who plans, monitors as well as implements. Why? Because this is for the rural households, right? Then this again, these points are self-explanatory. Please go through these points. Now, coverage. The scheme currently employs 15 million people daily at over 1.4 million work sites. So these are some numbers very important that you can mention in your means answers as well, right? Now the allocation has declined over recent years, which is not a positive sign. Now since inception, it has generated more than 31 billion persons days of employment. Asset creation. So these are some numbers that you can quickly go through it to understand the evolution of the MGNREGA scheme. So the essence is to provide jobs to people, unskilled jobs to the rural people. Simple. Now, what is the significance? Infrastructure development. Now, this has led to infrastructure development in the rural areas, which essentially means that it has improved the natural resource base. Now the people in the villages have access to water, sanitation, roads, housing. Why? Because of the work generated, because of the work generated under the MGNREGA scheme. Then income security. Now during covid pandemic, right? The migrants had to go back to their villages. Now when they went to the village, right, this scheme came to the rescue of this scheme. The MGNREGA scheme came to the rescue of the migrants who returned back to the villages from the urban areas. So this scheme actually helped people during the most troubling times, that is during the COVID-19. Migration reduction. Now this scheme has also reduced the migration from rural to urban cities or rural to urban areas. Asset creation. Yes, it has led to creation of assets like roads, ponds, right, the sewerage system, schools, etc., etc. Rights based approach. Now this scheme, it adopts rights based approach, which means every citizen above the age of 18 living in the rural areas has a right to ask work. This is his legal right. So please remember, it's a legal right, it's not a constitutional right. So please remember, this can be a question point asked in the prelims examination. Accountability. In order to ensure that this program is transparent, is accountable, we have provisions like social audit. Through this social audit, right, through this social audit is very important to enhance transparency and accountability. If there are any gaps, there is corruption or anything, then this social audit will help to plug in the gaps and to enhance or improve the transparency of this particular scheme. Now these are the best practices under the MGNREGA scheme, right? For example, in the Jagal Jalpaiguri, in the Jalpai, what is this? Jalpaiguri village. This scheme, MGNREGA scheme, has led to the polyculture system where simultaneously the fishes are farmed as well as the vegetables are grown, and this has actually given a boost to the rural incomes. And these are some of the other best practices you can please read in the DNA notes, right? Now coming back to the issue, what is the issue? As I told you, now in the recent years, in the last 4 years, 10.43 crore job cards have been deleted, right? These are the job cards that were deleted by the government in the last 4 years. Concerns raised. Now the critics, they argue that as the government has started Aadhaar linked payment, right, which means a worker has to link his Aadhaar number, Aadhaar card with the bank if he has to get money under the MGNREGA scheme. Because of this system of Aadhaar based payment system, this has led to actually deletion of 10.43 crore job card holders, which means if you do not have a Aadhaar card, then you simply cannot link your Aadhaar card with the bank account, which means that you simply cannot get payment under the MGNREGA scheme. The critics say that it is because of this Aadhaar based payment system, right? The people are losing, or the names of people are getting excluded from the program. Now the government says that the names of people that were deleted from the program is because of the valid reasons. Now, which are the valid reasons? For example, let's say if there is a permanent migration, a person has migrated permanently to urban area, or let's say a panchayat has become urban place. Let's say there is a duplicate entries, or let's say death of the worker. Only on these valid reasons, the names of people are deleted. The next one, Gram Sabha verification, which means before deleting the names from the program, the Gram Sabha verifies, which means there is a safety mechanism. Only once the Gram Sabha verifies, the names of people are deleted from the MGNREGA program. Then transparency measures. Again, these are the transparency measures. So these are the guidelines issued by the government to address the concerns of people who have found their name missing under the MGNREGA program. I hope you understood the second topic as well. Next, this article talks about the exercise, the maritime exercise between India and Africa. So let us try to understand. So question was asked in the year 2016 on the maritime exercise between India and the other nations. Now, Indian Navy, right, has introduced few initiatives like the IOS Sagar and this initiative. Why? The goal is to strengthen the position as a leading security partner and maritime primary responder in the Indian Ocean region. So, in the Indian Ocean region, India aims to establish herself as a security provider, which means this is what India intends to do. This is what India plans to do, that is to provide security to all the countries in the Indian Ocean region. And whenever there is any disaster, so India should be the first one to respond to the disaster. So this is the ambition India has set for herself. That's the reason India has started these initiatives. Which are these initiatives? Let us understand one by one. First, strengthening ties in the Indian Ocean region. Over the last decade, especially in the 21st century, India has enhanced cooperation with the IOR, that is Indian Ocean region littoral states, which means all the countries bordering the Indian Ocean region. For example, we have Sri Lanka, Mauritius, then the Eastern African nations, Maldives, etc. etc. Right? For example, we have joint naval exercise with the countries with the Indian Ocean region, littoral countries, maritime patrols, information exchange. Now, first, the second is the Sagar Vision of 2015. What is Sagar? Sagar is an acronym for security and growth for all in the region. This Sagar vision of a country, it emphasizes there should be regional peace, peace in the region, sustainable development and maritime capacity. Right? Sagar vision, which means each and every country in the Indian Ocean region should grow. This is a vision. Now, what is Mahasagar? Now, this was a vision given in the year 2020, 2015. Sorry, 2025, 10 years after the launch of Sagar Vision. Mahasagar, which means mutual and holistic advancement for security across the region. This was given when India visited Mauritius in the year 2025. To elevate India's engagement with the global. Now, global south is a term referred. Global south doesn't mean that countries in the south. It refers to the countries who are developing, or let's say poor nations, especially Africa and other Indian Ocean region nations. Right now, what is the focus under Mahasagar? To secure the maritime region. Now, which are the threats? Piracy, terrorism, maritime threats. These are the threats that India, or for that matter many countries, faces from the maritime region. So we are ready to provide security and also to bring regional stability. Piracy, illegal trafficking of drugs, people, and the fishing, illegal fishing, shared surveillance and information exchanges. So all the countries will share the information. By sharing the information, that is intel, the countries will be equipped to tackle the security. Then this is Mahasagar. Now, these are the major initiatives under Mahasagar, which we discuss in the context. Africa, India key maritime engagement, right? Now, what is this? The purpose, as I told you, the purpose is to enhance the relationship. How? The objective being to strengthen the maritime security and also to bring regional stability. So these are the initiatives launched under the Mahasagar vision, which was announced in the year 2025, 10 years after announcing the Sagar vision. Sagar, security and growth for all, 2015, Mahasagar 2025. This is self-explanatory. Please read by you. Then this is the second initiative, Indian Ocean Ship Sagar. IOS stands for Indian Ocean Ship. So these are the features under the second initiative launched under the Mahasagar vision, right? And what is the significance? To expand India's naval diplomacy in the African littoral, which means countries in African continent bordering the Indian Ocean region, right? Then positions India as a security net provider. So these are the points that we already have discussed. So the essence of the article is to make India a strong nation in the Indian Ocean region, which means the countries in the Indian Ocean region should rely on India, because India has guaranteed to all the nations to provide security, to respond if there is any disaster, and importantly to establish regional stability. I hope you understood the third article as well. This is the fourth article. Center concerned over hospitals not sharing organ transplant data, right? What is the context? The Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, right, under the Government of India, has issued a communication, sent a notice to all the states and union territories, right? Now, this concern, the central government has shown a concern. Why? Because the central government says that the hospitals are not uploading the organ transplantation data on their websites. Now this is legally mandated. Every hospital is expected to mention the data about organ donation transplantation on their website. Every hospital is expected, the hospitals who provide organ transplantation, donation, etc., they're expected to mention the data on their website, which is not happening. That's the reason the central government has issued a notice to all the states and union territories. Now, what is this National Organ and Tissue Transplant Organization? This organization is important for you in the prelims examination. It is apex, that is top national level coordinating body. It's a coordinating body. It coordinates. Why? It is responsible for what? Organ and tissue procurement, that is buy and distribution. To buy and then distribute. Organ, kidney, liver, etc. Tissue. Now see, what is tissue? Now the smallest, smallest unit is, smallest part of the body is cell. The cell, the cells combine to form tissues. The tissues combine to form organs. So let's say, for example, if the liver is completely damaged, then you have to replace the liver. But if let's say some part of the liver is damaged or some part of let's say kidney is damaged, you do not have to replace the entire kidney. You can simply replace the tissue, right? So this National Organ and Tissue Transplant Organization, it coordinates. Why? When it comes to organ and tissue procurement and distribution, to registry management, to mention the organ transplantation and the tissue transplantation. It was established in the year 2014 following the 2011 amendment to this act, which means this act, what is the act? Transplantation of Human Organs and Tissues Act. This was a law framed in the year 1994. This law was amended in the year 2011, which led to the formation of this organization. Headquarters, Delhi, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. I hope you understood the purpose of this organization. It coordinates with all the hospitals that are involved in organ and tissue procurement and distribution, and to maintain the data. Now, what is the organizational structure of this? It functions through two key divisions. One, we have the National Human Organ and Tissue Removal and Shortage Network, and the second one is National Biomaterial Center. So the organization, it functions through two bodies. There are two bodies under this body. This body came into being with the help of 1994 Act. This act was amended in the year 2011, which led to the formation of this body. There are two divisions under this body. One is this one. It's a central coordination hub for organ and tissue donation. When it comes to organ and tissue donation, it's a coordination hub, right? It manages donor recipient registry. Let's say, for example, this is a donor, this is a recipient. So they maintain the data. And then we have the National Biomaterial Center. It bridges the demand supply gap in the tissue availability. So this is about the tissue, this is about the, again, both organ and the tissue. So if you just remember these two names, it's more than sufficient. Please remember this body and these two names for your prelims examination. And then we have the Act of 1994. It provides statutory backing, which means this law was framed in the parliament of a country. It was made in the parliament. It has a statutory backing. So the NOTTO organization has a statutory backing. Which backing? Statutory, which means this law mandates the establishment of NOTTO. Right? So these are some of the features. So again, this is self-explanatory. The issue, I hope you understood the context. Important for you to remember in this article is the 1994 Act, which was amended in the year 11, led to the formation of NOTTO organization. NOTTO organization functions through two key divisions, and which are the two divisions we have discussed in the previous slide. I hope you understood all the four topics. that we have discussed for today's DNA. Let us go through few practice questions so as to understand whether you understood all the topics, right? So the first question, India's relationship with China must be anchored in a policy of engagement but underpinned by credible deterrence. In light of the statement, discuss the evolution of India-China relations and suggest a balanced approach to managing the bilateral relationship, right? So start your answer with introduction. In the introduction, mention the recent conciliatory approach India's adopted vis-a-vis China, right? But at the same time, we have to, we have to invest in capacity building so as to, create deterrence, right? In the introduction. Then in the body of the answer, start with the historical foundation of India-China relationship. The start like the period of 1950s, then the period of 1960s until 2000s, then 2000s until 2010. So again, the India-China relationship is marked by cooperation as well as conflict. Mention the cooperation, mention the conflicts, and then mention the India's evolving stance or the recent stance and the reason that necessitated India to adopt conciliatory approach, especially the lack of consistency or inconsistency in policies of the Western nations. And finally, focus on the way forward, as in what India needs to do. That is, India has to invest in capacity building. We have to modernize the military. We have to, balance our relationship with China and other nations, right? So we have to make sure that relationship does not deteriorate or worsen. On the other side, we also need to work with the like-minded nations like the quad members so as to balance, so as to secure our national interest. So this is how you frame the answer. I hope you understood how to frame the answer for this particular question. Now these are the DNAs of questions of the last DNA, right? That was discussed yesterday. Now this question on tuberculosis was discussed yesterday. With reference to tuberculosis, consider the following statements. The first statement, it is caused by protozoa. It is not caused by protozoa, it is caused by bacteria. So this statement is incorrect, right? It can spread through the air from person to person. Yes. Currently, there is no vaccine available. Wrong. There is vaccine available. So this one is also incorrect. The correct answer is option B for question number 2. Question number 3. The question is on anti-dumping duties. Anti-dumping duties is imposed when imported goods are sold at a price higher. No, they are sold at a price lower. Very simple question. Anti-dumping duties are not allowed under WTO. They are allowed if the imported goods are damaging the domestic industries, then the anti-dumping goods duties are allowed under WTO. This one is incorrect, which means the correct answer is option D. The next question is on migration trends. Now remittances to India significantly declined during the COVID-19. No, it did not decline, it remained stable. Post-pandemic, there has been a rise in Indian migration to non-traditional destinations such as Malta, Georgia, and African. Yes. The demand for Indian healthcare professionals has declined globally. Wrong, it has rather increased. So 1 and 3, this is incorrect. 1 and 3, this is incorrect. Correct answer is option B. And then these are the DNA questions from today's topics. MGNREGA, the other one is NOTTO, the last one is the Indian Navy in 2025. This marks the end of the DNA. I hope you have understood all the 4 topics that were discussed along with the questions. So the points where I emphasize to read by your own, I request you to please open the DNA notes that you can find in the comment section or the description. And for the quiz, please open the DNA quiz mentioned in the comment section or description. Please open the link, attend the questions, and please post your score in the comment section. I hope you enjoyed the watching today's DNA session, and on this note I call it a wrap. Thank you so much for watching. Good luck.